People tend to notice those who talk a lot, laugh out loud, or fill a space with sound. But in everyday life, there are also people who enter a room very quietly. They don't take up space. They don't pull attention toward themselves. And yet, something feels different. The room seems to slow down by a beat. The air feels a little thicker. And somehow, the people around them become more aware of themselves. Whenever I think about the energy of Scorpio, that's the feeling that comes back to me. Scorpio's silence doesn't feel empty. It feels more like a quiet room just after the lights are turned off, when even the smallest sounds become clearer. In that stillness, they observe, not in a way that judges, but in a way that listens deeply, to eye contact, to breathing, to the things that haven't found words yet. There are evenings spent sitting beside someone like that, saying very little, yet feeling understood in a way that's hard to explain. I once knew a Scorpio during a time when everything felt tangled and unclear. While everyone else rushed to give advice, that person simply sat nearby, poured another glass of water, and turned on a small lamp. No rapid questions, no empty reassurance. Just a steady, quiet presence. Looking back now, it was that silence that helped me breathe again. For Scorpio, silence seems to be a kind of language, like a small flame burning in the dark, not blazing bright, but not going out either. They hold their emotions inside for a long time, not because they don't want to share, but because they need time to understand themselves first. On the longer roads of life, Scorpio often walks a little more slowly. Oshing looks a little more carefully, and in doing so, they learn how to stay with their emotions, even the uncomfortable ones. Late night lights often make me think of them. When the city has gone to sleep, there are still a few rooms lit up, quiet, unnoticed, unhurried. Scorpio is like that light, not showy, but warm enough for someone to find when they need it. Being near them can feel like sitting in a safe space, a place where you don't have to pretend you're okay and you're not pushed to become someone else. This kind of energy isn't meant for those who rush. It asks for time, for patience, and for a gentle kind of listening to yourself. For Scorpio, silence isn't distance, it's how they connect. And if one day you find yourself feeling at ease in a very quiet moment beside someone, well, it may be that you're touching that exact kind of energy, soft, deep, and very human. Stay close to a Scorpio long enough, and you begin to notice that their emotions don't rise to the surface like crashing waves. They move more like a current beneath a river, quiet, steady, yet carrying real force. From the outside, everything can seem calm, sometimes even a little cool. A composed face, a measured voice, a response that doesn't rush forward, but inside, emotions are moving slowly, deeply, as if every thought needs to be gently set down, considered, and only then allowed to be touched. There are moments when others have already passed through a feeling and left it behind, while Scorpio is still there. Not because they're holding on, but because they need to understand what truly happened within them. Sadness, for them, well, it isn't just sadness. It has shape. It has weight. It carries its own story. Joy is the same. It doesn't burst out as loud laughter, but settles into a quiet warmth, resting somewhere behind the chest. Every so often, in the middle of what seems like an ordinary conversation, a Scorpio's gaze slows. It might be a sentence that accidentally touches something deeper. It might be an old memory drifting past. They don't speak right away, not because they're hiding anything, but because they're listening to themselves. For them, emotion isn't something to react to instantly. It's something that needs to make a full circle inside before it finds its way out. The way they carry emotion is much like the way they move through life, unhurried, unforced. They pause when they need to. They move forward when they're ready. And in those pauses, well, a great deal happens that no one else sees. Like a quiet room at midnight where thoughts become clearer, where old questions are gently placed back on the table, without noise, without the pressure of immediate answers. Being near a Scorpio can sometimes make time feel slower, not because they pull it back, but because they live fully inside each emotional moment. They don't rush past feelings just to feel better sooner. They stay with them long enough to understand what they're trying to say. And perhaps that's what gives their energy such a particular depth. No need to perform, no need to prove, just existing in a way that feels deeply, unmistakably real. There are signals that don't need sound. They arrive very softly, like a draft slipping through a hallway before a window has time to close. Scorpio often notices these signals before they can even name them. A glance that lingers a little longer than usual, a sentence that seems casual but misses its familiar warmth, a silence that falls in the wrong place. Details like these pass quickly for most people, but for Scorpio, they're like faint streaks of light in the dark, subtle yet enough to draw attention. This sensitivity isn't loud, and it isn't always comfortable. At times, it's tiring, feeling too much, too early. In a crowded room, Scorpio may sit quietly, while inside, they're registering every small shift in the air. Who is trying to hide something? Who just hesitated in their thoughts? Who is speaking words that don't quite match what they feel, not to judge, but as a natural reflex, shaped by years of silent observation? So there are evenings when Scorpio comes home with a heaviness they can't fully explain. Only a sense that during the day, they brushed against too many things that weren't theirs to carry. Emotions borrowed from others, tensions no one voiced, unspoken thoughts hanging between conversations. It's only when they sit alone in a quiet room, under a soft light, that they slowly begin to separate those layers, to see what belongs to them and what was only passing through. That hard-to-name sensitivity is also what sometimes pulls Scorpio into silence. Not because they're shutting down, but because they need space to filter what they've felt. Like water needing time to settle after the wind moves across its surface. Once things grow still enough, they continue on, carrying a quiet understanding that doesn't need to be explained. And perhaps because of this, Scorpio often becomes a deeply attentive listener. Not the kind who listens to reply, but the kind who listens to feel. Beside them, people often say things they hadn't planned to say, maybe because they sense that non-judging presence, an attention that is gentle, deep, and safe enough for emotions to be touched, and then to find their own way to stay, or to leave, very naturally. In the relationships that move through a Scorpio's life, connection rarely begins with promises. There are no grand declarations, no commitments placed on the table too early. Everything unfolds slowly, like a long road that only reveals itself one short stretch at a time under late-night streetlights. Scorpio watches, listens, and lets time answer the most important question for them. Do I truly want to stay here? When they do stay, it's usually very quiet, no announcements, no need for anyone else to notice. They're simply there on tired afternoons, there when an old story is told one more time, there even in the silences that many others find uncomfortable. That presence feels like a small flame in a dark room, not blazing bright, but enough for someone else to know they're not alone. Scorpio's loyalty isn't always easy to recognize at first. They don't repeat the past to prove how long they've stood beside someone. They don't ask to be acknowledged. What keeps them there is usually a sense of deep connection, the feeling that their presence matters, even in quiet ways. And as long as that feeling remains, they stay, steady, consistent, like the familiar habit of turning on a light each evening before sitting down. At times, others may mistake Scorpio's silence for distance, but if you look more closely, you'll notice they're still listening, still remembering small details, still paying attention to whether someone seems more tired than usual, more withdrawn than before. Their loyalty lives in these small things, a brief message at the right moment, patience that doesn't need explaining, choosing to stay when things are no longer easy. And there are moments when Scorpio chooses to leave, not because they've stopped caring, but because they sense the inner flame beginning to fade. They rarely make that choice impulsively. Leaving often comes after many nights of reflection, after long stretches of questioning in a quiet room. And when they go, they do so gently, without noise, without harsh words left behind, just as they arrived, quietly. In a world accustomed to big promises and loud displays of presence, this kind of loyalty can be overlooked. But for those who have ever been chosen by a Scorpio to stay, the feeling is unmistakable. It doesn't need to be spoken, just the knowing that somewhere in the flow of everyday life, there is someone who keeps a small flame burning, warm enough, steady enough, and deeply real. What Scorpio endures is rarely visible on the surface. It's more like walking down poorly lit roads, where each step has to be tested carefully. There isn't always a dramatic event to point to. More often, it's the waiting that stretches longer than expected. Moments when hope has to be folded away neatly just to keep getting through the day. Time doesn't move quickly there. It quietly adds weight to the shoulders, then steps back, and as if watching to see whether the one walking can still stand. During those long nights, Scorpio learns how to sit with what feels unfinished, not rushing for answers, not trying to push the heaviness away. Just lighting a small lamp, bright enough to see the edge of the table, dim enough to leave certain thoughts unresolved. They come to understand that some things can't be fixed right away, and that sometimes the only thing to do is stay, breathe steadily, and let tomorrow arrive on its own. This kind of endurance doesn't look like victory. It's more like standing at the side of the road in a light rain, clothes already wet, still patiently waiting for the last bus. There are moments when others pass by without noticing, moments when even Scorpio forgets how far they've come. But each morning, when light touches the windowsill, they realize they're still there, tired but not broken. What few people see is how Scorpio supports themselves through very small rituals. A cup of hot coffee sipped slowly, a short walk just to feel the wind, an old song playing softly once the room has gone quiet. These details might seem insignificant, but for Scorpio, they're like tying a thin thread to the day, keeping it from drifting too far away. No one applauds these moments, yet they're what steady the heartbeat again. There are times when the exhaustion shows, very quietly, a sigh without sound, a gaze that softens when a conversation brushes against something tender. Scorpio doesn't make much of these signs. They trust that emotions, when faced honestly, will soften on their own, and if they have to keep going, they do so at their own pace. No comparisons. No pressure. Over time, this silent endurance turns into something solid. Not something to display, but something to lean on when needed. It teaches Scorpio that they can move through dark stretches without losing their kindness. That standing strong doesn't have to be loud, and that sometimes simply continuing to walk, slowly, steadily, is enough for a new day to open. Very quiet, very human. For Scorpio, after mornings like that, emotions don't rush in right away. They arrive slowly, like sunlight hesitating at the edge of a curtain. They don't offer trust to everyone who passes through their life, not out of fear, and not necessarily because they've been hurt too much, but because they understand something very clearly. Once emotions open, they don't easily return to their original shape. That there's something inside Scorpio that keeps reminding them to be careful with their own heart. Each act of opening up feels like pushing a heavy wooden door. The hinge makes a soft sound. The hand has to be placed just right. The pressure has to be measured. Too fast, and the door might swing back. Too slow, and the effort itself becomes tiring. So they choose their own pace, not faster, not slower than what they can truly hold. In early encounters, Scorpio often stands a little apart, not to be cold or distant, but to see more clearly. They notice how someone holds silence, how a person listens when there's nothing to say. whether a story feels honest to the emotion behind it. These small details pass unnoticed for many, but for Scorpio, they form the foundation of whether to take another step forward or quietly pause. When they finally feel safe enough, opening up doesn't come as a declaration. It shows itself in subtler ways, staying a little longer, sharing a thought that isn't fully formed yet, allowing someone to step into their quiet room where the light is soft and everything needs to be handled gently. The moment isn't loud, but if you're paying attention, you can feel the air change, warmer, more real. There are also times when Scorpio closes the door again, not in anger, not with blame, simply because the sense of safety isn't strong enough to keep it open. They understand that not everyone needs to go deep, and not every connection is meant to continue. Closing the door can be a way of protecting the inner space from being stirred too much, a quiet choice, but a necessary one. While that carefulness can sometimes be mistaken for being hard to reach, but from the inside, it's just respect. For their own emotions and for someone else's, they don't want to give what they're not ready to give, and they don't want to take in what may not truly fit. In a world accustomed to fast connections and hurried words, this slower rhythm can feel out of place. Yet for Scorpio, it helps things keep their original shape, not distorted, not forced. And when the door truly does open, it's often because the person standing there has been patient. No pounding, no pressure, just standing. Long enough, quiet enough. Then the connection arrives naturally. No promises, no labels. Just two breaths sharing the same space. Safe, silent, and enough to stay. After staying long enough in spaces like these, Scorpio begins to notice things that daylight often overlooks. Not because they go searching for darkness, but because their eyes have grown used to the shade. On roads that seem familiar, they notice the small crack along the edge of the sidewalk, the sound of someone's footsteps slowing behind them, the story that was cut short and never fully told. These details don't frighten them. If anything, they make everything feel more real. Some conversations pass gently on the surface, yet Scorpio can sense what wasn't said. There's no need to ask more, no need to dig deeper. They simply take note and let it rest. They understand that everyone carries a hidden side, things not yet ready to stand under the light. And seeing that doesn't mean intervention is required. Sometimes respecting its existence is enough. In quiet rooms, when a story ends at its pleasant part, Scorpio often listens to the space that follows. They don't rush to fill it with advice or conclusions. That space, for them, is like the remaining part of a song. No notes, yet still holding rhythm. There, real emotions lie still, waiting to be understood in the gentlest way. This ability to see what's hidden shapes how Scorpio approaches people, with a particular kind of patience. They're rarely surprised by flaws or contradictions. They're familiar with the way each person carries layers, the layer meant to be seen, the layer kept hidden, and the layer even they themselves haven't touched yet. Knowing this, Scorpio doesn't force anyone into a fixed shape. They allow people to be who they are, with all their incompleteness. There are moments, though, when seeing too deeply becomes heavy. On some nights, late light spills across the floor, and Scorpio sits quietly, thinking about the stories they've heard, the emotions they've carried on behalf of others. It takes time for them to return to themselves, to pour a glass of water, open a window, and let the night air carry away what doesn't belong to them. That's how they keep their balance, so they don't sink into layers of feeling that run too deep. And yet, because of this very gift, Scorpio often becomes a place others turn to when they want to be understood, not fixed. Beside them, people may say things they've never said before, or simply sit in silence without feeling pressured. In those moments, Scorpio's presence feels like a soft light in the dark, not exposing everything, just enough to see the path. And within that gentle glow, the hidden corners no longer feel frightening. They become simply part of being human, seen, accepted, and set down, very quietly. After moments like these, change in Scorpio often begins without anyone noticing. There's no clear line between before and after. Everything shifts quietly, like a floor giving the faintest creak as night settles in. They don't wake up with a resolution to become someone else. It's simply that on an ordinary morning, as light touches the edge of the table, an old thought no longer fits. A familiar emotion suddenly feels less heavy than it once did. Scorpio rarely changes through dramatic actions. They change through the way they see, the way they look at a road that once made them hesitate, the way they view a relationship that once felt essential, the way they see themselves in the mirror, and without the need to brace or prove anything. These shifts make no sound, but when they gather over time, the world around them begins to look different, even though everything is technically the same. There are evenings when they notice they no longer want to react the way they used to. A sentence that once made the heart sink now simply passes by. A situation that once tightened the chest can be set down more gently, not because it's been forgotten, but because it's been understood. Understood that emotions have their own life cycle, and not every feeling needs to be carried all the way to the end. This inner change is like rearranging a room. No one outside knows what you moved, what you let go of, or what you decided to keep. But when you step inside, you can feel that the space is different, a little wider, and a little easier to breathe. That's how Scorpio works with their inner world, slowly, carefully, without an audience. Sometimes they find themselves standing at a road that once felt familiar, yet no longer wanting to turn the same way. There's no great regret, no excessive excitement, just a calm awareness that they've gone far enough not to need to return. The steps that follow feel lighter, not because the road is easier, but because the weight has already been set down. Scorpio often carries this transformation like a gentle secret. No need to share it, no need to explain. Those who pay close attention might notice it in eyes that hold less tension, in a smile that arrives slowly, but stays a little longer. And if no one notices at all, that's fine too. This change wasn't meant to be seen. It was meant to be lived with. And within that very quiet current, Scorpio keeps moving forward, not faster, not slower, just walking with a lighter feeling inside, as if something has been rearranged just enough, neatly enough, for a new day to open, without declarations, without clear signs, simply with the sense that from the inside, everything is shifting toward more space to breathe. Very quiet, very human. Within that rhythm of life, Scorpio's need for connection slowly becomes clearer. Not the crowded kind. Not long conversations meant only to fill the space. They're drawn instead to moments where they can sit beside someone without having to explain what they're feeling, like two people standing by a window, watching the rain fall, each carrying a private stream of thoughts, yet not feeling distant from one another. The Scorpio seems to understand that closeness isn't measured by how many words are spoken. It lives in the permission to be oneself, in the ability to slow the breath when someone is nearby, in not having to polish a story to make it sound better, not having to hide the awkward pauses. Connections like that are rare, but when they appear, they carry a very different kind of weight. There are evenings, after a long day, when Scorpio chooses to call someone familiar. The call isn't long. Sometimes it's just a few simple questions, then both sides fall quiet, listening to the sounds of life on the other end of the line. And somehow, that shared silence softens the feeling of being alone, like a small light turning on somewhere, not to illuminate the entire room, just enough to remind you that you're not alone in the dark. Then they don't rush to widen their circle. Every relationship they keep needs time to settle, to see how deep it might go. Scorpio isn't searching for perfection and connection. They're searching for truth. Truth can be messy. It can be tiring. But if it can be shared without being forced to change shape, that alone can be enough for them to stay. When Scorpio commits, Their feelings are rarely half-hearted. They don't love in passing. They don't show up superficially. Their care reveals itself in remembering small details, in listening to stories told again and again, in patience when someone hasn't yet found the words. It isn't a grand sacrifice. It's simply how they choose to place their time and emotion where it matters to them. At the same time, Scorpio understands that not everyone is ready for this kind of depth. Some connections remain on the surface, and they accept that. No lingering sadness, no blame. Just the quiet recognition that people have different depths, and not every moment calls for reaching the bottom. Because of this, when Scorpio does find a connection that can go deep, they honor it by keeping the pace slow. No pulling, no pushing. They let things open in their own natural way. And in those very quiet moments, when two people can sit in silence without feeling lost, emotion becomes unmistakably real. No need to name it, no need to explain it. Just the knowing that, at that deeper level, connection is present, warm enough, steady enough, and enough to stay. When connections like these appear in Scorpio's life, everything seems to slow by another beat. Not to hold on, but to feel more fully. They don't try to make themselves special, and they don't look for ways to be seen more. Their rhythm is like a late-night light still on after the streets have emptied. Not because someone is watching, but because it offers just enough brightness to keep moving forward. Perhaps Scorpio's difference lies in this. They allow themselves to live in tune with their inner rhythm. They don't rush toward noise, and they don't chase ready-made standards. They let emotions arrive when they arrive, stay when they need to stay, and leave when the time feels right. These movements don't ask for explanation, and they don't wait for approval from the outside. They happen naturally, like steady breathing in a quiet room. At some point, others may begin to notice this, not through words, but through feeling. What's the feeling of sitting beside someone who doesn't need to prove they're okay? The feeling of being allowed to sit in silence without it turning empty. The feeling that, even without naming it, a presence can still feel whole. And when that realization comes, connection often arrives as gently as a nod, an understanding that doesn't need to be spoken. There are days when Scorpio moves through life in very ordinary ways. No big events, no obvious turning points. Yet, it's within days like these that they learn to set themselves down a little more gently. No bracing, no forcing, just living with what's there and letting things unfold in their own time. That rhythm may not look like anyone else's, but it fits them. Sometimes, in the quiet of an afternoon, you might find yourself wondering, what makes a presence feel trustworthy? Is it words, is it actions, or simply the feeling of being near someone without needing to change who you are? That question doesn't need an answer right away. It can stay, settle, and slowly find its own way through lived experience. And as the story comes to rest here, what remains may not be a definition of Scorpio, but something lighter. The sense that difference doesn't always need to be proven. Sometimes, living honestly within your own rhythm is enough. Enough for the late-night light to stay on. Enough for the road ahead to open. Very quietly, very human.